Hello again. I'm back for Melissa Reed's Avatar, Book 1 by S.D. Perry. When we left off, the Jem'Hadar had just come through the wormhole. The station and the Defiant were being upgraded, so they weren't running very well. And their guard ship, the Aldebaran. I think I've figured out my problem with that word. I keep wanting to say Alderaan. It's a completely different thing. So anyway, had just been destroyed. And they were going after the station next. So, right straight into it. To Chapter 5. After Ro's not-so-gentle persuasion, Quark had produced a Class 1 isolinear rod that he'd been storing for his standing Rayla. He had immediately followed up with an invitation to dinner, ostensibly to ensure no hard feelings, which she had refused, but pleasantly for the same reason. She saw no reason to make an enemy of the Ferengi, and she had to admit she had a soft spot for people who didn't strictly abide by the rules. She had just gotten back to the security office when the red alert hit, and the computer instructed her to implement emergency shelter protocols. Due to an unnamed threat to the station, it wouldn't or couldn't elaborate any further. She had the computer display a checklist as she calmly locked the data rod away, hoping that her staff was better prepared. They had to be, though prepared for what exactly she didn't know. Communications between Ops and the security office were down. Shar wouldn't answer his comm badge, and she didn't feel comfortable bothering anyone else during a crisis. I love how this attack is being seen through so many different perspectives. It doesn't matter anyway. The plan's the same for me. Direct civilians to the reinforced areas, evacuate and secure prisoners if there were any. There weren't, and a locator check for the security officers on duty informed her that she was the only one who wasn't in position. Ro locked the office and stepped back out into the river of people rushing through the promenade, finally unable to continue denying her own fear as she saw it all around her. A small child was sobbing somewhere in the crowd, a terrified sound of irrepressible angst, inspiring in Ro her own. Is it war again? Is it ever going to be over? She was no stranger to battle. After the Dominion had effectively obliterated the Maquis, she'd led a small team of independent guerrillas against the Cardassians and the Jem'Hadar, and later the Breen. Her group had held no allegiances other than to each other, earning no accolades for their efforts nor needing any. As with the Maquis, the righteousness of the cause had been enough. She had been in as many conflicts as any Federation officer, if not more, and had done so with fewer people, less powerful weapons, and no outside support. The difference is, I'm not in control here. I'm one of many, and the decisions aren't mine to make. It wasn't battle or even death that frightened her. It was feeling helpless. The station was under attack, and all she could do, all she was supposed to do, was try to limit casualties, and trust that someone else would make the right decisions, when trust was the one thing she'd never given lightly or easily. However she felt about it, it was happening. Rose spotted two of her deputies working to control the crowd and moved to join them, wondering if she would ever feel like she belonged on DS9, or anywhere else that required her to put her faith in others. And hello again. Can you lay down? Hey, Sammy. Bashir hurried past lines of muttering, frightened people filing through the corridors of the Habitat Ring. Sam, why don't you lay down? Lay down. Sorry. Yes, good boy. Try this again. Bashir hurried past lines of muttering, frightened people filing through the corridors of the Habitat Ring, his emergency kit slung, his heart pounding with fear. Ezri was on the Defiant. Where I should be, if they'd only called a moment earlier. He'd been seconds too late, and the first explosion had hit the station even as he turned away from the sealed airlock. He'd seen a half-dozen Defiant crew members on his run back to the promenade, all of them as unhappy as he was to have missed the ship's hasty departure. Unhappy and not a little anxious, the Defiant had disembarked, presumably to go into battle, with a crew of techs. Since he'd been unable to join the Defiant's crew... Sorry. Hi, yes, you're blocking my view of the Kindle. His next priority was to coordinate with the other doctors on board to help activate all the contingency medical stations and prepare for trauma cases. I'm glad to know there's other doctors aboard. Often during the series, it seemed like Bashir was the only one there. He reached the promenade and saw Ro Laren and her security team directing groups of civilians to the designated shelter areas mid-core. As he approached Ro, the station rocked again, the thunder of another blast resounding through the hull, drawing startled cries from the hurrying crowd. The air was charged with fear, the constant bleat of alarms promoting urgency rather than calm. Lieutenant, do you know what's happening? All he'd gotten from Ops was the order to report to the Defiant, and that the station was under attack. She seemed surprised by the question. Don't you? There was no point in stating the obvious, as the station trembled anew with power flux. They were being fired upon by someone, communications were down all over, and their defenses were negligible at best. And with what Ezri had been telling him about the Defiant... Really? We're in trouble, Bashir said, and Ro nodded grimly. There was nothing else that needed to be said. Ezri, be safe. The force of feeling behind the thought was so powerful that he felt short of breath, an intensity that startled him. They had slept together for the first time just before the great battle of the war against the last great battle of the war against the Dominion, and going to fight then had been difficult, fearing for her as well as himself, but things had still been so uncertain, and at least they had been together. In only a few months, so much had changed. I can't see. Doctor, I have to go make sure the shops have been evacuated, Ro began. Of course, Good luck, Ro. Be careful, Bashir said, and saw that he'd surprised her again, although he wasn't sure how. Trying to read over the dog's head. Of course, good luck, Ro. Be careful, Bashir said, and saw that he'd surprised her again, although he wasn't sure how. He didn't have time to consider it either, or how his feelings for Ezri had complicated his life, or of all the things that could go wrong, he had his own duties to see to. With a nod to the others, Julian turned away and ran to the infirmary, thinking he would give anything to be on the Defiant, anything at all. And he's gone. Possibly he's as bored with the Ezri-Julian thing as I am. When Kira gave the command to engage the enemy, Nog tried to keep an open mind, to work the problems rather than consider how disastrous the situation was, but it wasn't easy. He knew better than anyone just how pitiful the defenses were right now, how many systems were down, how many weapons offline, and with the Aldebaran destroyed, their chances of coming away unscathed had dropped to a negligible percentage. Focus, stay focused, reassign pulse phasers 2 and 4 to manual. Got to divert partial impulse to shields. Commander Jas took control the second she beamed aboard, assigning positions and prioritizing system checks, but she was making decisions in part based on what he told her. Nog stepped between the engineering and tactical, the engineering station and tactical, trying desperately to direct power where it was needed most, while Ezri struggled with the partially disabled communications interface. The science station was mostly dismantled, sensor arrays routed through tactical, and Prin Tenmei sat at the helm. With the exception of the commander, Ensign Tenmei was the only person aboard who was where she was supposed to be. Not a reassuring thought, in spite of her piloting skills, because that was it for the bridge crew. The other techs were below, grappling with the weapon system. The standard operational crew was 40. They had 14. At least they weren't relying on the cloaking device, although that was a small comfort. After the war, the Romulan government had agreed to let the Defiant keep it. It never occurred to me that they wouldn't. As the Alpha Quadrant's first line of defense against anything that came through the wormhole, it only made sense, even to the characteristically skeptical Romulan Senate, to provide DS9 and the Defiant with every possible advantage. Unfortunately, like virtually everything else on board, the cloak wasn't even functional at the moment. Try to transfer the transporter EPS tab to the navigational deflector. I can do this, I know this ship. Another thought that wasn't particularly reassuring, considering the state of the Defiant, but he was too busy to come up with anything better. The Jem'Hadar scored their first hits against the station, even as Kira gave the word. Sam, what are you doing? Don't chew on things. Nog had had nightmares worse than what was happening, but not by much. Ensign, take us out, Jas said. The armor over the warp nacelles is still temp, so try to keep the targets below and in front of us. Nog, what can we do about the lag time on beam launch? Nog stumbled over to Tactical as Tenmei disengaged the docking clamps and tapped the thrusters, the ship's AG lurching with the power flux. Not much, sir. 0.65 seconds, minimum. Jas took it in stride. We'll just have to fire early then. Shields up. Stay with Tactical, Lieutenant. She spoke casually, as if the Jem'Hadar ships would hold still, waiting for the Defiant's phasers to catch up. Nog had been intimidated by Jas' generally cool disposition since she arrived. But considering the situation, her calm was a definite asset. The main screen showed a blank expanse of space until the Defiant swung around, just in time for them to see the station take another series of hits. Nog struggled to quash feelings of panic. All three of the attackers were apparently concentrated on the fusion reactors at the base of the lower core. He could see dark streaks of Polaron damage all across the section's hull, visibly warped by the disrupted shields. They'll hold. They can take a lot more than that. They could, except with the upgrades. Those upgrades. A heavy percentage of the station's power was tied up in bypass circuiting, and nothing was certain. The short-range shield emitters were essentially down, running with no backup. If the strike fighters continued to hit any one area, they could inflict serious damage. They already have. Taking out a Nebula-class starship hadn't proved much of a problem. Positions, Lieutenant, and run course probabilities. Without targeting, it may be the best we can do. Most of the directional sensors were working. Nog read the numbers aloud, tapping into trajectory calculations as he spoke. The Jem'Hadar had turned back toward the station, wheeling into a loose formation, point high. Dax, how's the station doing? Jas asked. Unable to establish a full interface, Ezri said. Their shields are down at least 40%. Jas seemed unfazed. Let's see if we can tempt them away, people. Ensign, get us as close as you can to point at full impulse, bearing 227 Mark 9, and be prepared to run evasive pattern Theta 16 at my word. Lieutenant Nog, when we're 20 kilometers out to range, lay down a calculated phaser spread in front of the lead ship, firing at will. Better they think we're a bad shot than underpowered. Nog could hear the grim humor in her voice. Who knows? Enough runs and we may get lucky. It was a clever scheme. Jem'Hadar could be fanatic about following point, and although the computer predictions had a minimal chance of scoring a hit, the phasers would come close enough to be threatening. The evasive pattern would turn the Defiant back to run a 2-degree parallel to its strafing course, keeping the well-shielded front of the ship facing the attackers. Okay. The Defiant sped away from the station, angling into the path of the point ship. The instant they went to full impulse, Nog could see they were in serious trouble. Because it's all been cool up till now. At the unmanned engineering station, a bank of lights started to flash. All across the bridge, lights brightened and abruptly dimmed, filling the tool-strewn deck with shadows. Sir, Sir, mid-hull RCS thrusters are bleeding power from the electrical system, Nog shouted. He knew the danger would be obvious to Jas. An electrical crash would shut everything down. With a full crew, it would have been noticed immediately. Or if I bothered to look closer, I should have checked that. I should have. Compensate. Cut impulse to half and run a tap, Jas snapped. Sir, if we boost it from here without checking the source, Nog began. I know, Jas said. We risk an overload, but we don't have a choice. Nog stepped away from tactical, but the commander was already out of her chair and headed for the engineering station. "Stay at your post, Lieutenant. I'm on it." "Ensign, report." 110 kilometers and closing, Tenmei said tensely. A lot of tens in that sentence. "Intercept projected course in 11 seconds. As Nog knew from experience he'd hoped never to revisit, those seconds seemed to stretch into eternity, time slowing, his senses recording it all. The trio of Jem'Hadar ships streaked toward the station, their flat, insectile shapes shimmering like water mirages beneath heavy shields. The low hum of the bridge systems increased, the light strengthening as Jest manipulated the power flow. Ezri called out the stats from DS9, confirming the loss of shield efficiency to 37% and severe energy surges in every major system. Nog laid in the phaser directionals, intensely conscious of the sweat trickling down the back of his neck. The hot, acrid smell of scorched optical cable, and the crawl of numbers on the console that told him the Defiant was being targeted. 40, 30, now. Nog fired, a series of layered shots that responded with agonizing slowness to his command, and as the bright pulse bolts shot out into space, he could feel that they were lucky, the triumph blossoming in his gut, visual proof following an instant later. Yes! The right flank ship took a massive hit to its port side and fell away, spinning out of control as hull plates tore and atmosphere escaped. A veil of light and mist trailed behind the dying ship like a comet's tail, a pale streak lost in the brilliance of the final explosion a second later. Everything sped up then, as if making up for the eternity of waiting, happening too fast for Nog to absorb all at once. He started to call out the information to Jast, who was still at engineering. Tenmei was shouting at the same time that the lead ship was shifting position, and from the pulse phase remains below, Turo Ann was trying to tell him something about the hull, her voice filtering through the comm in a haze of sudden, violent static, because the Jem'Hadar point ship was firing, scoring a jagged hit across the Defiant's bow. A terrible light filled the screen. Nog hugged his console as the gravity net pitched as the ship bounced and jerked, and Jas let out a short, sharp scream. The commander flew back from the engineering station in a shower of sparks and fell heavily to the deck. Nog stared at her for half a second before snapping his attention back to his screens, tapping up damage reports and checking their shields, but that half second was enough, the image of her face clear in his mind. Commander Jest was dead. So, one Jem'Hadar ship destroyed, and the first officer killed. So, I don't know if I'd call that a net gain, really. That was another exciting chapter. And it went by fast, as I didn't stop. This video is closing in on 20 minutes long, so we'll pick up with chapter 6 in the next one. Well, I'm guessing we're not going to pick up right back up with Nog on the bridge and Ezri on the bridge of the Defiant because of all the perspective switching, but it might prove me wrong. Also, my Trek Book Club, another plug. I don't have a pin to show you because it's in the other room, but go check it out, and we will see you next video.